The following incident happened to me around 15 years ago when I was trying to earn some money on the side as a pizza delivery guy. It was the end of the summer on a Friday night when I got this call that led to a, let's say, curious situation. The phone rang 20 minutes before our closing time, but our deadline for any new orders is a half an hour. I was already cleaning up the kitchen when I decided to take the call, since people tend to ask where their pizza is. I tell them that it's on the way and it will be there soon. This Friday night was particularly busy and therefore we got a lot of calls. Since some deliveries were already 40 minutes late, I took the call and answered it. "Mario's Pizzeria, this is Caesar speaking. How may I help you?"
"Oh, hello there. Good thing I got through to you,"
the person said with a bit of a shaky voice.
"I'd like to order something."
I interrupted him there and said, "I'm afraid I can't take any orders anymore, since we are closing for the night." The voice, still in that shaky state, pointed out that it will be a lucrative order, he promises. I then asked him what he wanted and he said,
"Oh, well, I'd like to have 2 pizzas with 4 salads and 2 bottles of wine."
That was indeed a good order, so I told him to wait while I asked my boss if we should take the order. My boss said that he could make an exception and took down the address. I asked him where that is, since we still had to use a map. The address he gave me was a new one, and I saw it would bring me from the main road onto a dirt road that leads into a forest. The order was ready and I made myself ready for the last delivery of the night. Right before I left, my boss said that I could drive straight home after the delivery. I got into my car and started to drive out of the village where the pizzeria was located. The main road was dark, but the forest was even darker. I could only see what my headlights revealed before me. I was driving around until I got to the driveway of my delivery. The house was completely dark, and from what I could see, it looked completely run down. At this point, I thought that the first house that I passed was the correct address since the lights were on. I drove back, and when I got to the property, a guy came out and asked me who I am and what I wanted. I said that I am bringing the food that he had ordered. He said that he had not ordered anything. I then asked him if this is house number 3. He shook his head and said that this is house number 1. He went on to tell me that it has been vacant for over 5 years now. After he mentioned that to me, I called my boss and told him that it was an obvious prank caller, since the house was abandoned. My boss was already pissed off, since it was such a big delivery and he didn't want to waive the profit. He told me to drive back to the address since some people could be there for a party nearby, at the river, or camping in the woods. I drove back and this time I walked right up to the door. I saw a note that read, "Please bring the food inside the hallway and leave it on the side table, where also your money is." I found it kind of strange, but it would make sense if they didn't want to wait inside the house if they were in the woods camping. I looked around but I didn't hear anything, and I saw no fire. It was just dead silent. I then said out loud, "Pizza service is here," but there was no reaction. I then convinced myself to go inside. It was kind of a cliche setting for a horror movie, but I was tired and just wanted to get away from there. I went back to my car, took out my flashlight, and made my way inside. It was not at all clean since it has been unoccupied for 5 years. Around 3 meters in there was the side table that was mentioned in the note. I walked up to the table and saw another note on it. It read, "Keep the change." The bill was €72, but there was €90 on the table. I then yelled into the darkness of the hallway that this tip is too much. There was no reaction, and then I thought to myself, I'm not having this continue any longer than it has to. I took it, since there was no response. I put the order on the table and said, "Thank you," into the darkness of the house. I then left and got back into my car. When I was backing up to get back onto the path, I looked back one last time and saw something weird. It looked like a head was peeking out of the window. When illuminated by my lights, the head retracted again very quickly. I was not dealing with this anymore, and I stepped on the gas and sped out of there. This incident was keeping me up the whole night, and I decided to go back the next day. I went back the next day to see if I could see anything. I decided to go look into the house from the outside. The hallway didn't have any more boxes. Apparently there was someone here after all. The question to this day was, why would that person order so much when there was apparently no party, since there were no cars and you couldn't hear any sound? All I saw was, or what I think was, a head poking shortly out of the window on the first floor. I was kind of joking around after that. What if I wasn't attractive enough for him to do something to me? What would he have planned? What if it was my female colleague that delivered that last order instead of me? Growing up, I lived in a house I'm sure was haunted by at least one benevolent ghost. I know such things aren't the norm, and I can't explain them, but I do know hauntings are quite real. It was not uncommon for things to vanish one day, only to turn up in an obvious location a few days later. On one occasion, when I was 13, I came across my mother's wedding ring, which she had lost while going to yard sales when I was a toddler. It was laying under the edge of a TV on an old steamer trunk we used to store blankets during the summer. There was no way it had been laying there that whole time, in full view of anyone passing by. On another occasion, I was under the weather and I had stayed home from school. Around 3:30, my mother had gotten home from sub-teaching. I remember laying there listening to her working on things in the kitchen, kind of in La La Land, when an unseen force pushed me down in the bed. I remember vividly feeling myself pushed, seeing my visual perspective change as my body moved downward slightly, and hearing the bed springs squeak. I was now fully alert, laying there thinking, what the fuck just happened? The next thing I knew, the smoke alarm outside my bedroom door went off. I jumped up and went running out into the hall to find the upstairs of the house filled with smoke. I hurried downstairs, since that seemed to be where the smoke was coming from, only to find that my mother had burned something while cooking. Something or someone was apparently trying to warn me of danger. When I bought my house where I currently reside, I thought that was all behind me. I was so wrong. One night, back when I was a bachelor, I was happily snoozing away in my bedroom when I was suddenly awakened around 3 a.m. by a feeling of malevolence. I opened my eyes to see a pure black figure, human-shaped, that reached from the floor to the ceiling 9 feet up. The figure was strangely blocky, almost pixelated in appearance. I don't know how long it had been watching me, if that's even the right word, because there were no eyes on this thing. I'm a paramedic and a firefighter. I'm not the kind of person that scares easily. I had an instinctual primal terror. My only thought was, oh shit, defend yourself if you want to live. At the time, I kept a loaded 9mm Beretta pistol on my nightstand. I instantly lunged for it. Before my hand had even made it halfway across my body, the figure departed through the outside wall of the house. I was so terrified that there's no doubt in my mind that had that figure still been there when I brought the gun up, I would have not hesitated to open fire on it. I have not seen that figure again. In the years since that day, I met my wife, the love of my life, and now I have 2 kids. The gun is now locked up in the gun cabinet, of course, and I have not seen the figure since. Maybe I scared it as much as it scared me. A couple of years ago, I moved into a small town in Ohio to begin a graduate program. Since I was 15, I have always loved everything vintage or old, clothes, movies, and especially houses. The town where I lived features a neighborhood with historic homes, many of which are inexpensive enough for even poor graduate students to rent. I was thrilled to find a home with tall ceilings, stained glass windows, and original hardwood floors. I've lived in old homes before and know that they are often haunted. After moving into this house, I noticed a few strange things that raised my suspicions. For instance, one morning I woke up and noticed all of my cat toys from downstairs were lined up outside my bedroom door. I chalked it up to my cat's mischievous. The old house shifted frequently in the night. The floorboards creaked as the house settled. It's one of the things I used to love about old houses, being able to actually hear and feel a home's character and its age. Other things bothered me. For example, I spend long days on campus, teaching and then taking my own courses. It's not uncommon for me to leave in the morning with a lamp or two on for my return at night. A couple of times, I returned home to complete darkness. I pride myself on my extensive book collection, gathered from years of college literature classes. They are meticulously organized on my shelf. When I was dusting my bookcase, a few books appeared to be missing or were on the wrong shelf. I'm not in the habit of lending books out to friends, and these weren't books I recall having recently read. I wasn't sure what to do. I thought about asking my landlord if the house was haunted, but I didn't want her to think I was crazy. Plus, nothing I had noticed could really be proven, nor did any of it seem malicious. One afternoon, however, I was checking my mail when I noticed an envelope that had clearly just been placed in my slot, not actually mailed to me. My landlord did that, sometimes leaving me Kroger coupons and cat treats. I opened the envelope and saw photographs. They were of me, sleeping on my living room couch. No letter, nothing, just the photos. I couldn't tell exactly when they were taken, because I usually wear the same black sweatpants when I'm lounging around the house. However, I nap pretty rarely. The last nap I remember taking was around finals week of fall semester, because that's always a pretty stressful, busy time. That was a few weeks before I received the envelope. Naturally, I began to panic. All this time, I suspected that the house was haunted, but the truth was much more terrifying. First, I called my boyfriend to see if he had played a prank on me, but he didn't know what I was talking about, and as I said, I'm not in the habit of taking naps. He advised me to call the landlord to ask if any past tenants might still have keys, or if anyone had access to the house without my knowledge. My landlord told me that she couldn't think of anyone, but she agreed to change my locks. I ended up breaking my lease because I was terrified that someone was stalking me. My landlord was pretty nice about it, and I could tell she felt bad. I didn't go to the police, and I moved into a different part of town, into an apartment complex. It's bland and sterile and I hate it, but I feel safe, and I haven't had any issues since moving over a year ago. I'm still not sure who might have been the person to take the photos. Was it someone who had access to the apartment, like the monthly exterminator or a plumber, a former student, even the landlord, or was it someone else? I also wonder just how often the photographer broke into my house. Did he or she simply stumble in that afternoon because I left a door unlocked and decided to teach me a lesson? Or were those creaking steps something more sinister than just an old house settling in the night? I'll likely never have a solid answer, but I know this. I used to love living in old houses. I don't anymore. This story was told to me by my mother, but has been confirmed by her brothers and sisters. When my uncle was a teenager, he snuck out with a bunch of his friends late at night. They went to a graveyard, and being skeptical about ghosts and such, they brought a Ouija board. They found a sunken grave and decided to use the Ouija board there. They asked a few questions but got no responses. At this point, they started teasing the spirit. My uncle said he felt a breath on his neck and left straight away. His friends followed shortly after. The next night, my mother was sleeping in her bed, and at 2 a.m., she heard footsteps on the gravel outside, and it stopped at her window. She never dared look at what was there, but she did say that whatever it was did not feel friendly at all. That continued for a few nights, always at 2 a.m. until the fourth night. The phone rang. No one got up to answer it, so my mother walked out into the living room to answer the phone. When she picked up, she got no response besides heavy, raspy breathing, and again, this happened for the next 2 nights. Phone rings, no response. By this point, my mother was pretty scared and could not sleep at all. Expecting the phone call at 2 a.m., she waited out in the living room. The phone rang and my mother started crying, and when she answered the phone, she screamed, "What do you want from me? Why are you doing this?" And a voice answered with,
"Tell them not to do it again."
After that night, nothing else happened, but you can bet your ass my uncle never went near a Ouija board again. I was halfway through my 3rd year of high school when a new kid began attending. He was very cute, tall, jet black hair, light blue eyes, and eyelashes for days, and best of all, he was so smart. I soon found out that we had a mutual friend. After a few months of us hanging around the same group of friends, the mutual friend pulled me aside one day and said that the new kid was going to ask me out, and to please say yes because he had never had a girlfriend before. I thought the whole situation was cute. So he asked me out and I said yes. Everything was going great the first week. We had a lot in common. He would hold doors open for me. He'd walk me to class and carry my books. He didn't pressure me into anything sexual. At the end of the week, I went to his house for dinner. It was a typical suburban home in a nice area of the city. His parents were very nice and constantly smiling. He took me on a tour of the house and showed me all of his awards and trophies. I noticed that there was a gap from 7th grade to junior year. I asked him about it and he said, "Oh, you didn't know? I skipped a few grades." That immediately made me uncomfortable. That was too much of an age difference for me. I asked him why he hadn't told me before, and his response was, "Well, you didn't ask." But eventually he said, "I thought you wouldn't like me." I tried to put on a smile for him and move the conversation along, but in my head, I had already decided to break up with him ASAP the next school week. The rest of the night was relatively uneventful. The next week at school, he walked me to my first class and leaned in for a kiss. I gave him a peck on the lips and he immediately grabbed both of my arms and just stood there with his mouth closed, but moving his head around like we were making out. He finally let me go. My face was soaked from his saliva that I don't even want to know how he got it on me through a closed mouth. I uncomfortably smiled and he started tugging his shirt down. I looked down and saw that he had gotten aroused. I looked away and he said, "Whoa, that was my first kiss. It was everything that I had hoped it would be." Then he walked away to his class. The next few days I kept trying to find a way to break up with him without hurting his feelings, but he kept escalating his advances. It went from an awkward kiss to a sad attempt of a French kiss to an unwanted boob grope. I had enough. I took him aside and made up some lame excuse about how school was very stressful for me right now, and I couldn't give him the time and the affection that he deserved, and a bunch more of the "it's not you, it's me" bullshit. He started crying, not a few tears or some sniffles, but the loud and obnoxious crying. He threw himself against the closet wall. "You're breaking up with me?" He started smacking his head against the wall hard enough for blood to get on the wall. I panicked and assured him that we could still be friends. He immediately stopped crying and asked for a hug before I went to my next class. I reluctantly gave him a hug, but when I tried to separate from the hug, he held me tighter and I couldn't get free. I was 5 minutes late to my next class and I had blood on my shoulder and the side of my face. The weekend went by and I had hoped that he had cooled off and gotten over it, but he didn't. He insisted on still walking me to my classes, and when I would tell him to stop, he would either walk behind me or he'd show up at my next class before I did. After a few days, I stopped going out during the class breaks, and then he would start to come in. I explained what was happening to my teachers, and only my shop teacher banned him from entering the classroom, but explained it was due to the machinery and safety. After a few weeks, he asked me if I'd go back out with him. I told him no. He continued following me around, and when I confronted him about it, he began to cry again and broke his finger. He actually grabbed his left pointer finger and snapped it completely back, then to a sickening, unnatural angle. Once again, I panicked and said that he had to stop following me to my class because I was visiting a college with my shop class. I could tell he didn't really believe me, but he accepted the answer and went to the office to get his finger looked at. I hated how much of a fucking coward I was, but I didn't want him to keep hurting himself. I asked our mutual friend about everything that had been happening. Did he have a history of this? I was told that he was heavily medicated due to his mental instability, and the reason why he was attending a public school was because he had been kicked out of an academy for bullying, and gossip that he had been cutting locks of girls' hair and keeping it for God knows what. 2 days went by, and then he came to school with a cast. He had broken his finger in 2 places. So the day of my field trip comes, and it's a great day. I left before he had come to school, and we were supposed to be gone the whole day, but we ended up making it back for the last period of the day. I showed up and he was right outside of my class. I pulled him aside and he started crying and asking why I had ditched him and why I had been avoiding him all day. I reminded him about the field trip and asked him if he had gone to all my classes. He had. He started crying about how he didn't believe that I had gone and that I was lying, why I didn't like him anymore, and what could he do to win my love. I calmed him down and went to class after refusing to give him a hug. He followed me into my class, and I immediately buried my head into my backpack pretending to look for something. When he finally left, I was relieved, but the teacher actually had the class discuss what had happened. Apparently, while I refused to look at him, he stood next to my desk with his arms open for a hug and hadn't moved until the bell rang. I explained everything that had been going on and that I didn't know how else I can get him to understand that I didn't like him. The majority of the class explained that he probably thought he still had a chance because I said we could still be friends. After class, he was outside my classroom, and I told him we couldn't be friends anymore. I told him everything that he had been doing was creepy and not romantic. I don't remember everything I said, but I just unleashed everything about how I felt. He started smacking his head against the wall again, and I left. I was fed up with him, and I wasn't going to keep backtracking my words every time he threw a tantrum. I didn't see him for a few weeks, but I was called to the office because his mother had called a school counselor about how he has been acting. The school counselor had told me he stopped taking his medication and he was going to be hospitalized to get him under control again. They wanted me to write him a letter apologizing for everything. I told them no, and explained why I had nothing to apologize about. They told me that he had been cutting himself and had threatened to kill himself. I still refused. I wasn't going to be roped into his shit anymore. They eventually got him back on his medication and he didn't start going to school again until next year. By that time I was a senior and he had been lowered to a sophomore. He would still follow me around, but it was from a distance and he never made contact. 4 months into the school year, he began dating someone who had the same physical education class as me. So I'd see him waiting outside the gymnasium, and on occasion he would stare at me while he made out and groped her. Around that time I started finding things in my backpack, love letters, crude drawings of sex or murder. I brought it to the school counselor, but nothing was done about it. The drawings eventually stopped and I enjoyed the rest of the year. I graduated high school and thought it was finally over. I took a year to relax before going to a nearby college. While I was away for a few months, my mother called me and said she kept finding envelopes addressed to me but with no return address. That year I found out through local gossip that he had gone off the deep end and was back to self-harm and refusing to take his medication. When I returned home, I had 126 letters with no return address. I read through a few of them, but they were filled with graphic and disturbing sexual things. The letters I read had a clear extreme BDSM and rape torture theme, but in them I was always the reason for the person's anger, and was the one getting tortured or raped. I didn't bother reading them all and just threw them out. As cold-hearted as it sounds, I didn't care. He was out of my hair and not my problem. I didn't understand why people even kept coming up to me and telling me about him. About a week into my first semester, everyone found out that he had killed himself. He had been doing well and then overdosed on his medication and hung himself. I received an angry call from his mother soon after and she was blaming me. I told her I had nothing to do with it since I obviously hadn't even seen him in almost 2 years, and she should be yelling at whoever he was dating rather than me. Then I found out why she blamed me. He had left a suicide note, and of course I was mentioned in it. He blamed me for his problems, saying that if I had just loved him back and been a good girlfriend, then things would have been fine. Once gossip about his suicide note got out, everyone blamed me. Everyone kept asking me what I had done to him, why I hadn't just given him a chance or stayed with him to keep him happy. It was fucking ridiculous. No one seemed to think or care about what might have happened if I stayed with him, or if I had tried leaving him much later. No one seemed to remember that we had gone out for less than a month. I eventually finished half of my degree, then moved and finished the rest. I still go home and visit sometimes, but people still bring it up. It's no longer a focal point, just a side statement. They always say you never forget your first love, but none of that was love. That was just someone's first obsession. Hey guys, thank you all for watching my video, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join the Nightmare Army. I'm always looking for new soldiers in my Nightmare Nation. So guys, I'm really sorry that this wasn't a Collab Tuesday video for you guys. I just wanted to switch it up a little bit. And also, I want to say thank you to the subscribers for submitting their stories. The first Love Scary story, oh man. That is honestly really creepy, and I hope you're doing better from all of that, because that is just, And the pizza delivery story, oh man. Honestly, dude, I have no idea what I would have done in that situation. That is like, you know, do you go in the house? Do you not go in the house? I would just be, And sorry if you guys can hear my dog in the background licking himself. He wants to talk at the end of this video. His name is Rocky, by the way. Anyways, guys, thank you all for watching, and just remember, the best ideas always come out of nightmares.